Go ahead and begin.
And we're recording.
Thank you, Melissa. Well, good evening and welcome everyone. This is the Multimodal Transportation Workshop. This is part 2 of a 3-part series. And tonight we are going to be covering the sidewalk, pedestrian, and bicycle network proposed concepts, as well as the results of the road safety audit along Division and some of the proposed solutions at that location. I'm going to, for the benefit of those of you joining us for the first time, going to give just a little bit of background before I introduce our team. We launched the multimodal transportation planning effort in 2019, late 2019, as the result of the initiative by City Council of their strategic plan to really develop a comprehensive multimodal plan for all users. And so that's really what we mean by the word of multimodal, is considering all modes of transportation. So bicyclists and motorists, trucks, as well as pedestrians, and really looking at everything in a holistic manner. This is intended, when completed, to be a 20-year plan. And we have had numerous public engagement efforts along the way for the past year. And we're now at the point of wrapping up our proposed solutions. And this is our final workshop series. We're really looking forward to the engagement and hearing from everyone on the line tonight. This is recorded, as we mentioned at the beginning, and will be posted on our website for any of you that would like to share it with others. So with that, I will go ahead and introduce our team. We have Mandy Roberts with OTAC on the line with us. Mandy has been a wonderful leader on this project. She is an Idaho licensed landscape architect with over 25 years of experience, specifically in multimodal transportation planning. She has developed numerous plans and design standards with, I would say, a focus, if I may, on enhancing walkability and really enforcing, community values and visions in the various jurisdictions that she has supported. As well on the line, we have Preston Stinger. He is with Fair and Pierce. Preston is a subconsultant to OTAC, and he is joining us with the engineering hat on, as well as he is a professional transportation planner and has over 14 years of experience developing multimodal transportation plans similar to this study and analysis that we have been going through. So with that introduction, I am going to go ahead and turn the presentation over to Mandy to kick us off and walk us through some of these concepts. Before I do that, I apologize. I will mention that we're going to go ahead and have our consultants provide the presentation and go through some of the challenges that were raised along the way through our community engagement efforts, and then discuss the proposed solutions. And then we'll open it up for comments and questions at the end of their presentation. That said, if you have any questions as they're talking, please go ahead and use the Q&A there at the bottom of your screen, and feel free to send in questions, and we'll kind of try and keep an eye on those as we're giving a presentation. So with that introduction, Mandy, please take it away.
Okay, thanks, Amanda. Are we able to share the content from the website on screen then?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you want me to share?
Yes, if you don't mind. I wasn't sure.
Just give me 1 second, please.
Okay, great. That's what we had done last week. Well, thank you, everyone. While Amanda is bringing up the information, I just wanted to mention that it's really been our team's pleasure to work with the community on this plan over the past year. And it's exciting to see it reach this conclusion where we really have some great draft ideas and recommendations coming forward. And we're eager to get community input on these and then to finalize the plan. So tonight we're going to talk about Division Avenue and the safety audit and recommendations from that, and some of the key issues and considerations related to Division, as well as recommended solutions. And then we will also be talking about ideas for the priority pedestrian network, as well as bicycle network recommendations. But I think it makes sense to spend a little bit of time talking about division first. That was first on the website. And I will just kind of kick off it with general observations that our team has. And then I know, Preston, you have a presentation on the actual safety audit, which I think would be great for you to share. But a few things that we noted and heard a lot about from the community include things like the lack of snow storage, and with that, difficult snow removal, particularly on the east side, which really creates barriers to pedestrian walkway. And because division is such a important route for students and others walking to and from many destinations or bicycling to and from, that was seen as a really important concern. The need for a pedestrian crosswalk between Cedar and Spruce. School zone speed areas not adhered to consistently, limited roadway, crosswalk lighting, some shrubbery or foliage overhanging into sidewalks, and funnel configuration of what the recommendations would be should consider delivery access along the corridor. And I think I'll stop there, Preston, because you're probably going to get into recommended solutions as a result of the safety audit. So why don't we go through that, and then we can also talk about this cross section that's up on screen. But do you want to go ahead and share your screen? Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So there was a road safety audit done, and this was done a little bit separate from the multimodal transportation master plan that we're talking about today, but the recommendations from it are tied into this plan as we talk about it, and that's why it's in our subject today. It came about through a grant application that Amanda and her team went through, and it came through LTAC and ITD, and that's how this all came about. So a road safety audit click on it here, is kind of a formal process, and it's meant to be that way. It's kind of structured to look at things in an unbiased way and have a mixture of team members on the team from different levels of interest and skill sets to look at this in a holistic way along the corridor. And this just shows the steps that were gone through for the RSA, identifying what the road is, selecting the team, and conducting a pre-audit, which looks at gathering data and plans that have been done along the corridor. And then we do a series of field reviews throughout different times of the day and on separate days to see conditions at various times. And then we conduct the audit analysis using all the data that was collected and the information observations that came through the field reviews. Then we present those findings to the owner, in this case being the city, and that was done yesterday in City Council. And then they prepare a formal response on what of those recommendations they are accepting and moving forward with, and the timeline for putting those into play. And the results of all this are tied into the multimodal transportation master plan. So we'll walk through what we did, and there was an audit team pulled together that consisted of several different individuals from different organizations that have had different levels of experience on Division Avenue. And you can see the list of people there, from school district to the city to police to county, and then to the consultants and LTAC there. So in part of gathering the data, we collected average daily traffic, which you can see on the left-hand side there. And I should mention that the study area of Division went from Michigan up to Cedar, which is right here. However, kind of in the middle of doing this, there was interest of going all the way up to Spruce Street because of the proximity of the elementary school there, and just to make sure that we're not missing anything with that northern portion of the road. So we included that portion as well. 6,600 is the daily traffic on average on Division Avenue. And you can see the side streets and what levels they have, anywhere from about 1,000 up to 4,400 vehicles a day. And compared to US2 down here is 12,000. This right-hand figure, it's really hard to see. I know it's blurry in this case. It's showing the truck percentages. So what percent of the traffic on that road is heavy trucks? And this is showing 6% there on Division Avenue. And this is a designated truck route for this area because of some of the industrial uses up here to the north of us. And that is recommended to change in the master plan to another route, which will reduce the amount of trucks on this road and get that out of the mix of flow, given the nature of this road is not super conducive to that with the schools in that area. And then we collected some crash data. This came from ITD's and LTAC's web-based database that they have, and confirmed by the police department here, which their information gets tied into this information. So it makes sense that they would match. We have the crash severity, which is marked by different colors of dots here. A being an injury that's supposed to be serious injury, B being minor injury, and then down to the greens, which are just typically property damage in those cases. There were not any fatals in the 5 years that we looked here, but there were a couple more serious crashes at those locations you can see there. This is Pine Street, to give you some context. So just south of Pine, one at Oak, one north of Alder. And then the crash types here, and there's all different types of crashes that can be from rear ends to side swipes to head-ons to angled crashes. And those vary throughout the corridor as well. And there weren't any high clusters of a certain type of crash that would say this is a major problem here. There were just sporadic different types of crashes throughout different areas throughout the corridor. And this next map here shows what we call a heat map, and it identifies where you do have some clusters of higher crash rates, and that is at Pine. That's the darkest one there, and Cedar's the next darkest one. And to give you some context of what that means in density, we're talking about 8 to 9 crashes at Pine and about 6 here at Cedar. And then you have some others spread out throughout the corridor. The chart shows it shows you the number of crashes and what percent of all crashes that identifies with. We won't walk through all those, but we looked at those in different types of day to identify if there's a lighting issue or not. So, and the crashes, there is a higher propensity of angle crashes, which is typically at your intersections, which you can imagine, typically cars that are turning left through the intersection and getting hit by another vehicle traveling the other direction. And then that was compared with statewide in Idaho, just for comparison purposes to see how that matches with typical crash rates throughout the state. All right, so let's talk about some of the observations that we saw when we did our field reviews. And again, these were done throughout different times of day. We did them early in the morning, before school, during school loading, in midday, during the afternoon when school was letting out, and we did it in the evening during the peak commute time. We did it in the late night time when it's dark. So we did it all different times of day to make sure we're capturing all different conditions. So one observation here is there are significant traffic peaks during the school start and end times. And of course, in the morning, you have that coinciding with the peak of commute time as well. There's a crossing guard that you can see in the picture there. This is at Michigan, the intersection of Michigan and Division. And that crossing guard shows up during that peak loading time of the school. And he does an outstanding job from our observation. You should be lucky to have him there. I know he has some law enforcement background in his prior years and now is there as a crossing guard, and he helps direct traffic and also keeps the kids safe with crossings. And because of that, he really reduces some of the congestion that happens there. He lets cars go and buses go and stops the pedestrians and lets pedestrians go and so forth. So he's kind of a traffic controller as well as a crossing guard, and it's working really well there in the morning. Just north of that section, there are some jaywalking that happens on the east side of that photo. Right over here, there's a parking lot next to the church, and a lot of parents are there to either drop off or pick up kids depending on the time of day. And what that's doing is some kids are wanting to cross there instead of crossing at the marked crosswalk at Michigan, which is just about 100 feet south of us here. A lot of the intersections, they all have pedestrian ramps to the crosswalks, but not all of them are compliant to ADA. And usually that's due to either the slope or because of the truncated domes, the tactile pavement here for those with disabilities to be able to cross safely are either not in the right locations or not covering the right area within the ramp. Sometimes the ramps aren't located in quite the right location. As you can see here, the crosswalk is here, but the ramps are further over here. And in this case, this is for the other direction. And there's a raised curb here that's been hit by several things, as you notice, but they're just not compliant to current standards. The other thing is school zones. So we have two school zones. One is up north by the elementary school, and one is south by the high school and middle school. And these are they are in effect for those from 7:30 until 3:30. So throughout the entire day, even during the time when school is in session, but there aren't kids letting out or coming to school, it's in effect. And what you see when that happens is people become less compliant with that 20-mile-per-hour speed zone when it is going when kids are not coming in and out of school. And we did have some interviews with police officers that were patrolling while we were out there, and they actually do a really good job in enforcing speed limits and patrolling that at a pretty high rate during those school peak times, which is going really well and probably should continue. In general, it sounds like speeds are generally adhered to outside of those school areas, but within the school areas, people tend to travel a little bit higher speed, and that's where they're enforcing that with patrollers. As you're approaching Pine Street heading north, that intersection, it's an all-way stop. And you see, this is when school lets out, you see a longer queue of cars starting to back up here. And there is a higher demand for left turns as you're going on north on Division to turn left at Pine and go west on Pine. When this queue starts to spill back, vehicles who want to turn left, instead of waiting their turn to get up there to where the left turn left turn lane starts, they'll jump out here in the two-way left turn lane before the actual left turn lane for the intersection and jump out here. There's a lot of driveways up over in here because of the day school or the daycare school and the bowling alley and the coffee shop and things that are right here. There's a lot of conflicting movements happening. And when cars zip around here to go up to the intersection, there's other cars trying to turn left into there or left out of there. And there's cause for crashes there. And that is a cause for some of the crashes that have happened there. And the police confirmed that was the case. Also, street lighting. It is dark in many areas along Division. There are lights, on a consistent rate throughout the corridor, but it also, you can see there's dark spots within there. And there is typically a light shining at least on one end of the crosswalk, but not on both ends of crosswalks. And in some cases, it's a little bit hard to see at some of these crosswalk locations that you really want to light up and make sure motorists can see pedestrians who are either stepping out into a crosswalk or waiting to cross. And there are several locations where we have some shrubbery issues, foliage that are low hanging or overhanging, whether it's trees or bushes and low hanging limbs and things that obstruct walkers and bikers to either go out into the roadway or off the sidewalk, and in many cases blocking vision for vehicles who are approaching Division from the side streets and not being able to have a clear sight line to make safe movements out. And that's not only from a shrubbery standpoint, but also you have some power poles, telephone poles that are doing the same thing in terms of blocking sight lines. And then we have a few locations where bus stops are don't have many amenities, and during months where there are snow here that typically gets packed in on the sidewalks, there's not a place for the bus stop individuals to wait either. Right now it's in the grass, and they're either waiting in the grass, or if it's snowy, or trying to find a place to wait. Or if they're waiting in the sidewalk, that kind of obstructs the walking path for those who are using the sidewalk. So there's lack of amenities there for some of these bus stop locations. I will say, however, there are a couple of great locations, especially near the library, where there's a great shelter and bench, garbage can, those kind of things. So it's not every bus stop location, but there are a few. This is it's just on the north side of the middle school, where there's some pickup and drop off happening, as well as a drive aisle, and there's some conflicting signage where there's some things that say stop, other things say enter, and what should we be doing, and those are non-standard signs from national standards that we recommend be fixed there. Which the school district's aware of those, and I understand they're already have agreed to make those changes and are happy to do so. Here's another location of a power pole. This one not only is blocking some sight lines and sight distance for vehicles approaching the intersection to be able to see clearly, but they're also in the middle of sidewalks in some cases that obstructs pedestrians from being able to walk, and sometimes if they're in a group have to go around that, either into grassy areas or into the road. This is up by the elementary school at Spruce Street. RRFB stands for Rectangular Rapid Flashing Beacon, and that's those crosswalk signs. They have flashing yellow signs that go in the wigwag motion when they are actuated by a pedestrian here that pushes the button. Those are working great. I understand those have been in place for a decade or so and have been working really well since then, and came through a grant way back when. That's a great installation there, and they seem to be working really well. Some additional observations, and Mandy mentioned some of these already. We have some snow buildup, especially on the east side of the roadway, and there's not a lot of room to store snow, so it's either getting stored in the bike lane on the side of the road or pushed up onto the sidewalk. And with limited width of the sidewalk being at 5 feet, and the residents don't take the time to remove that snow, it just is obstructed for many of the winter months. And it sounds like from conversations with many of the local residents there that people just don't walk on that side in the winter time. They're forced to cross and walk on the west side, or they take parallel routes on streets that are east or west of us on Division. We mentioned this being a truck route, and there is a multi-use path that is 8 feet wide. It's a great path, and it seems to be used quite a bit, both by pedestrians and bicyclists. You get a mixture of cyclists using both the bike lane as well as the multi-use path, depending on what their comfort level is, and that varied by user. And if it is, especially in the winter time when the east side is closed with snow storage, you have everyone using that multi-use path, and it is a bi-directional use, meaning people want to go both directions on it. And with 8 feet wide, that is substandard to be able to allow safely the two direction of traffic, pedestrian and bike traffic, to go on that multi-use path. And at times it sounds like from comments that there's a lot of gravel buildup on that path. That probably comes from snow storage and things throughout the year, and other possible maintenance issues there. We checked out the sign reflectivity. Signs have a reflective film on them, and that's what makes them show up really well at nighttime when your headlights hit them. But with time, that wears off because of sun damage and weather damage and things, that reflectivity goes away. We tried to check as many of those as we could at nighttime with flashlights and things, and they seem to be pretty adequate from a reflectivity standpoint. Lane widths vary. Some section of division is a 3-lane cross section, 1 lane in each direction, plus a center turn lane or a 2-way left turn lane, also it's described as. You get north where it goes back down to 2 lanes, and those lanes are quite wide in some of those areas, upwards to 14 to 20 feet, depending on where you're looking. And the wider your lanes get, the faster people feel like they can travel. So it does induce some higher speeds in some of those areas. And then we talked about the cycling part of that already. So let's talk about some of the recommendations that we have. And we broke these up into 3 sections. We have easy/short-term mitigations that can be done sooner than later. And then we have some medium or midterm mitigations that can be done a little bit further down as funding becomes available. And then we have long-term or harder mitigations that take a little bit more time and effort to get done, and money to get done, and we'll talk about those. So one recommendation is, and this is more of a transportation demand management strategy, or TDM strategy as we call it, and it's to help reduce trips during your peak school times. And this is a program that's been successful around the nation. It's called a walking school bus program that can be put on by the school or the PTA or just a local community group that puts this together. And what we also heard is that parents are a little bit uncomfortable with their kids walking to school by themselves, even though it's less than a mile away. They didn't feel comfortable letting their kids walk because of the higher speed of traffic, because of the amount of traffic, because of the truck traffic, because snow's covering the sidewalk and there's not a safe place for them to walk, because of the mix of pedestrians and bikes and not enough width to kind of separate them. So there's all these kind of things going along in the parents' minds. And so they're either accompanying their kids, walking them to school, or they drive them. And the driving of them is the part that really increases the trips during those peak school times. So a walking school bus is basically having a group of kids that are signed up to walk with a guardian, in this case, a parent who signs up to take them in the morning, and another one takes them in the afternoon, and however they want to work that out. And they all walk together in kind of a walking school bus fashion. Another recommendation, we talked about the crossing guard there at Michigan, right there by the middle of high school, that does a great job in the mornings, but he's not present there in the afternoon. And it would be great to have an individual there, whether it's him or another crossing guard, to do the afternoon, because it does get a little chaotic there in the afternoon with high schoolers wanting to zip out of there and get to where they want to go after school. And there's a lot of bus traffic, there's a lot of teenage driven traffic, a lot of parents picking up and dropping or picking up, and a lot of pedestrian activity crossing at those crosswalks we see there on the photo. And having another guard there to help manage those crossings and help manage some traffic would be helpful. Mandy mentioned this in her comment as well, but there's a section of road between Cedar and Spruce that is about 2,200 feet without a crosswalk to cross division. The nearest one's at Cedar to the south, and the next one's up at Spruce, and there's not another way to cross unless you're jaywalking between that. So we recommend another striped crosswalk about at the midway point, which sits at First Street, and that's in the photo there. We put another horizontal crosswalk there on that street to cross division. So there's another location to safely cross, or that motorists are expecting pedestrians to cross with the striped crossing. So we talked about the speed limit, and today it's marked as 20 miles per hour, and it's in effect from 7:30 until 3:30. To get a little more compliance with that, we recommend that be changed to, we believe it can be maintained at 20 miles per hour unless we still see speeding going on, and then we recommend that change to 15 miles per hour. But the more important part of this is the flashing yellow signs, or flashing yellow lights on those signs. And those would only be in effect during your peak school times. So the crossing guards, which there is one up at Spruce Street at that crossing, and there's one down at Michigan, at least in the morning. And typically what would happen is that crossing guard would have the key to unlock the box to turn on these lights and actuate them. And then when they're done, they go over and turn them off, lock the box back up. This is a great way to alert drivers that something's different, that this isn't something in effect all day long, but it's only in effect during those peak times when the school kids are active. And it brings some more compliance to the speed limit and to yielding to pedestrians and crosswalks. The fifth recommendation is talking about that issue at Pine Street where we have vehicles zooming around that queue of cars to get up to the intersection. That is not a legal movement, and to help fix this problem, we recommend restriping that left turn lane. So instead of having a center turn lane that is used by all users to turn from either side of the street, let's restripe a designated left turn lane for Pine Street. We can extend that storage for those left turns back to a further distance so they can get into that lane sooner than they currently can. And by doing that, we would need to restrict left turns to some of these driveways. And if that's not something that people are still complying with, the next level would be putting in some sort of raised median to segregate that. But again, we understand there's some conflicts there with snow plowing and things, that would be a last choice if we had to go that route. Recommendation 6 is to go through and do a lighting inventory and analysis of Division Street to look at, the lighting along the road. Is it appropriate where there are dark spots that need to be lit up for better safety, not only safety for motorist to motorist from seeing one another, but also from motorist to pedestrian and also from pedestrian to bikes. So that should be done to see if there's additional lighting that need to be done, especially at the crosswalk areas. Some maintenance with the sidewalk areas on both sides of the street where there's low hanging branches and shrubbery and things that are obstructing the walkways, as well as obstructing the sight lines for vehicles at those intersections, is needed. Obviously, ideally, it would be the residents or business owners who are responsible for those landscaped areas would hopefully maintain those, but that's currently not happening. So there may need to be some help from the city or some organization to help with that. Recommendation 8 is those signs, which sounds like those are already in effect by the school district to fix those. Jumping into the medium term, let's fix those ADA ramps. And this is medium term because it does mean that we need to tear up some sidewalk and some ramp areas and gutter pans and curbing, and put in new ramps that are compliant with ADA. And then improve some of those bus stop areas that right now is just a sign that with not many amenities. Let's make it a little more comfortable for those who are riding the bus to do so. Encouraging people to ride the bus is only going to help things as a community in terms of reducing total traffic and trips around this area. And then relocate power poles where there are some in the middle of the road, and that will help with the sight distance as well as not obstructing the walking paths. And then some of the hard and long term. Amanda, I'm going to ask you, I know Mandy did some other cross sections that are a little bit better probably to look at.
Sure. Would you like me to
Talk
share
over
my
this.
screen?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind.
That is not it. Is that the one that you're looking for? Or would
Yep,
you like
that's
I have this
yep,
one.
we can talk about that one first. Or either one of those. Okay. So this one is between the intersections on division. We're recommending a change in cross section, and there's many reasons for this change in cross section. One is to reduce the width of some of the lanes, because today they are varying up into the teens, near 20 feet in some lanes, and that's inducing some higher travel speeds. So let's bring those down to a more manageable width of travel that still is more than adequate to accommodate vehicles as well as trucks. We will take out the bike lanes that are there today, and we'll put in sharrows. And sharrows are just the stencil that's painted in the travel lane in the middle of the road. That is an indicator to the motorist that they are sharing this road with other users, bikes in this case. And for those who are not comfortable riding in the street, which are, I understand, a lot of the school kids probably won't be comfortable doing that. We have the multi-use path still, but instead of having an 8-foot multi-use path on that west side of the road, we now have a 12-foot path, and that's a typical standard size for a multi-use path that has 2 directions of travel. And this will be multi-use, meaning pedestrians and bikes are sharing that space. And then we have a larger planting zone or plant strip or park strip, however you want to define that area between the multi-use path and the travel lane. And that is 8 feet, which is a great width to provide a buffer for those using the multi-use path and gives them a little more comfort level, segregation from those in the vehicles traveling in the travel lane. So it's a comfort level thing that reduces stress levels for those using that. And it also provides additional width for snow storage, not only snow storage for what the plows want to take off the road, but what the plows may want to take off the multi-use path as well. On the east side, you have the plant strip that today there isn't one. That sidewalk is right up against the road, and it's a 5-foot sidewalk. We are recommending widening that to 6 feet, and then having a buffer there, plant strip of 6 feet as well. And again, to help with a buffer to make it a little more comfortable for walkers to walk there away from the traffic, but also for dual purposes in the winter time of putting snow in that area. And that it's also can be utilized for service area, meaning there's some residential houses there that have driveways on that road and have trash cans that need to be put somewhere. And those would be put in the plant strip area. And that's where the trash garbage truck would come and pick those up. And then let's see, Amanda, if you want to go to the next one. So as we approach the intersections, the cross section changes slightly. The total right of way stays the same, but we allocate space a little bit differently as we approach that, because we need to accommodate left turn lanes as you come up to those intersections. So what we need to accommodate a left turn lane, think about Pine, for instance, as you approach the Pine Street intersection, we need a left turn lane. You still have your through lane. We still have sharrows there. We still have our multi-use path that's still 12 feet. We still have our sidewalk that's still 6 feet. But where we take some width away is in those plant strip areas. So it just narrows down those plant strips as you approach the intersection. And then it goes back out, expands back out as you go away from the intersection back to those original widths. So we talked about the benefits of that. We believe this is a great recommendation in the long term as we find funding to do this, and it's really going to help this be a little more livable of a street, take the trucks off it when we can move the truck route and make it a little more conducive to a school zone, slow traffic down to some extent, and make it more comfortable for all users. And that's all I've got.
That's great. Thanks, Preston. That's a lot of detail. And I think it might be good before we move on to talk about the pedestrian and bicycle recommendations to just see if there's any questions or comments on Division Avenue.
Great idea, Mandy. Melissa, would you mind checking in to see if we have anyone from the public that is interested in asking questions or making any comments? They're certainly welcome to raise their hand.
Yep, anybody attending who'd like to raise their hand, if you have any questions, we'll call upon you. And I'm not
Looks like
seeing any
there's-
hands raised at the moment.
Looks like there's one comment in our question about
QA.
sharrows.
Yes. Preston, would you mind taking the lead on that one?
Sure. So there's always different types of users in this cycling community. We have the group of oftentimes commuter traffic or recreational kind of competition cyclists who are generally in their spandex attire, who like to go at higher speeds and travel with the speed of traffic. And with those individuals, that's what the sharrows are for. You don't need the sharrows. Bikes can still share that area with the vehicles without the stencils in the road. That's still an appropriate thing. That's still a shared road on all roads. However, what the stencils do is it just alerts drivers that there are other users in place here. And with this type of road, that's what we're really trying to indicate, that you are sharing the space. But especially in this area where we have school users and kids from all ages, from elementary age all up to high school, there are many people who don't feel comfortable riding in the street. And that's why we provide another alternative for them. Ideally, if they're not riding on a sidewalk on the east side, we want them in a multi-use path on the west side. And so that's for those who want to take it a little easier and not have conflicts with vehicles. So we're just providing two areas for the different type of user.
Excellent. Thank you, Preston. I think we have another question here that is a really good one, and I may be able to answer it, but certainly Mandy and Preston chime in as well if you feel appropriate. The question is, will the proposed increase in the street lighting comply with the city's dark sky ordinance? And the answer is yes. All city projects are required to meet current city code. And the intent there would be to make sure that the lights actually point down and not up as much as possible. And we have had actually quite a few advances, I will say, in streetlight design and how they can kind of work with the different bulbs, as well as even in some locations we're seeing automated, so they turn on when there's uses and turn off when there's not. And so I think we're really excited to see how that continues to evolve and do kind of what's latest and greatest and meet the code, if not exceed it. Are there any other questions out there or anyone else that would like to speak? Okay, well, hearing none, we can always, if you think of something, we have a couple more concepts to go through, so we can certainly always come back to this at the end if you think of anything along the way. So with that, Mandy, I'll turn it over to you. Would you like me to share the pedestrian map?
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah, that's what these next two discussion items are more of, thinking about overall conditions in the city. So not as detailed, probably won't take as long to get through and discuss these. But the first one I want to talk about is this idea of designating a priority pedestrian network. So when we first started this project, some of the key issues and considerations that we observed, but also that we heard a lot about from community representatives and residents and students and others who we engaged with, were that throughout the city there are gaps in pedestrian connectivity and with sidewalks, and this occurs on various streets. So really there's a need for improvements throughout Sandpoint. Some streets have adequate sidewalks while others have missing gaps or areas that need repairs and updates. However, resources are limited, small town, limited budget to address all of these gaps at once. And so the thinking here is to really zero in on some priority networks that are connected to schools and parks and other destinations in the community, linking people from neighborhoods to downtown, for example, and then focus investment on improvements and filling in the gaps on these streets first. And that doesn't mean that at some point in the future we won't have it completely all done in Sandpoint. That would be a great goal, but this gives us something to focus on in the near term and in the next 15 to 20 years or so, as Amanda mentioned, is the horizon for this plan. And then we also recognize that there's just a need for maintenance and kind of monitoring condition of sidewalks, but that varies throughout the town. And so if we can think about prioritizing maintenance needs as well, this pedestrian priority map helps us do that. So just let me tell you a little bit about how this was created. First of all, we had a round of community engagement workshops early last year, where we got a lot of input on problems and gaps and issues from the community. We had also had a community-wide survey, and people, more than a couple hundred people responded to that and provided a lot of detailed information about, pedestrian priorities and needs, as well as issues that needed to be resolved. And so from that, we developed kind of a draft map of, priority routes. And we also did some analysis of gaps ourselves to help inform that. And then this last summer, we actually had a workshop session where we invited people to come in and really help us review these priorities and update them, or look at other routes that perhaps hadn't been identified yet. So while this is still a draft in the draft multimodal transportation plan that's coming together, we're hoping that it's getting really close to what it needs to be as a pedestrian priority network. And so what the city will do is, this priority network will guide decision-making on investment, as I mentioned, and the projects and pedestrian improvements that are needed and allocated in each budget cycle. And the city anticipates setting aside funding annually for a sidewalk improvements program to address gaps in the pedestrian network, focused on the priority routes that you see here. So I think with that, I'll pause for a minute and see if there are any additional questions or comments on this. I would say that, the map's a little hard to see here, but we're encouraging people to still go online, and you can enter comments in there and download the map and zoom into it, in more detail if you want. And I guess we can zoom in here and there too tonight if there's any questions about that. So I'm going to stop talking for a minute, and we'll see if anyone who's attending has any questions or comments about this. Guess not. Okay, good. Well, we'll see if we get, oh, here's one. Great. Yeah, why don't you address that one, Amanda? I understand sidewalk repairs are currently complaint driven. Is that true?
I would say primarily that is true. Yes, we do have some scenarios where, if city staff recognize an issue, we can certainly take that issue up with the property owner, the adjacent property owner. And just to clarify, our current city code requires that maintenance and repair of sidewalks is the responsibility of the adjacent property owner. That said, really what I'm kind of excited about is this concept of a primary pedestrian network. And having a map like this really helps staff, or is intended to help staff focus on along these streets, along this priority network, we can take a better and more focused proactive approach, which I think is really important. The current challenge is when that proactive approach is for the entire city. That gets to be a bit overwhelming given just the sheer volume of sidewalks. But when we can focus our proactive enforcement efforts and repair, identifying areas that need to be repaired into a map such as this, I think that's a great step in the right direction and improving our overall enforcement of making sure that we have safe sidewalks. That doesn't mean that we will not enforce a sidewalk repair issue if it's not on this map. That's not it at all. It's just back to the notion of, are they complaint driven? Right now, they are. I'm really looking forward to hopefully getting this adopted and us as being a little bit more proactive in that regard. So, and then a follow-up question is, can you see why neighbors don't complain about sidewalks in their neighborhood, even though the sidewalk might be very dangerous? I think that is common. I do think that it's something we need to continue taking a look at. I'm not sure that I have a clear-cut answer for that. I think it is important, and the city should play a role in making sure that we're proactively inspecting our sidewalks and doing what we can to prevent any injury. We do have a lot of dangerous sidewalks, particularly where we might have trees or they're really old and broken up. And I'm looking forward to being able to focus some of those annual funds on sidewalk repairs and really partner throughout the community on getting this network built out in the way that we would like to. And I think with that, we could probably move over to the bicycle map and then maybe take some more questions at the end.
That sounds great, Amanda. So we'll take a look at the map showing existing and proposed bike network. And with that, we just wanted to let you know of kind of some of the other pedestrian and bicycle mobility and access to transit recommendations that are going into the draft plan. So while there is a focus on the primary pedestrian network and improving that and putting funding towards that, with each budget cycle. So I do think that will make a difference, perhaps more than in the past, just because it's a focused, prioritized level of investment. So in addition to that, the draft multimodal transportation plan is recommending that we use the priority network plan to help with developing a snow removal program that identifies priority routes for snow removal and also maintenance activities. So considering that priority network plan as a critical area for maintenance activities. Some of the other things that we think are really important is to improve multimodal access to and from bus stops, the SPOT system, and having the city continue to work with SPOT to identify priorities and improve pedestrian access to and from transit stops, or relocating some stops and adding some shelters and amenities in places that don't exist today. Access to and from the Amtrak station. If you wanted to come to town by train or depart town by train, it's a little difficult to get there as a pedestrian or by bike or even by transit today. So are there some ways that potentially could be improved in the future? We will be asking the city to consider allowing bicycles on sidewalks on specific routes in downtown Sandpoint, primarily to facilitate access to and from City Beach and to help alleviate congestion that occurs particularly on Bridge Street and right down in that vicinity. We also suggest a study to determine really the feasibility and demand for micro-mobility solutions such as bike share, scooter share, and the pros and cons of doing that in downtown Sandpoint. A lot of communities have done that in Idaho, including Boise, where I'm at, and in some cases it's been successful. In other cases, there have been some lessons learned. So a study to really look into that and make recommendations will be helpful to the community. Also developing and implementing a traffic calming request program. So really formalizing that a little bit more and having it be less kind of reactive and more proactive is what that's about. And then the last thing I'll mention is, along with snow removal and maintenance, making accessibility improvements through a program that also includes set aside budget allocation each year for accessibility improvements, which would be like adding curb ramps or upgrading curb ramps at certain intersections, even in the vicinity of bus stops, to help provide barrier-free access for the public. And there also would be, looks like this one maybe got a little bit revised in the notes that are online, but there's a need for a parking study in downtown to really look at parking utilization and capacity together and think about parking improvements that might be needed in association with that. So those are some of the other recommendations coming together in the plan. And again, I think I'll stop talking for a minute and see if there are any other comments or questions on that. Oh, okay. Amanda, do you want to read that one? One is a fairly long comment.
Yes, I am happy to. I'm going to read it real quick just to see if I can try and summarize it here.
Okay.
So I'll take it in a couple different elements. The first one is that question that we've actually talked a lot about throughout this multimodal plan. And I think you and/or Preston would be a great one to kind of tackle this. And that is the question of how do we get this question says 10-year-old, it's often 8-year-old. How do we get an 8-year-old safely to ride their bike to City Beach? So maybe Preston, if you're willing to take that one, I know we've talked about it a lot.
Sure. Well, so Mandy talked about this bicycle network, and the network is really critical because we know that cyclists come from all over town. There's not one individual origin. In this case, we know where the destination is at City Beach, but they're coming from all over. So one path that is great for everyone is not essentially great for everyone because people are starting their trip from all over. So what we're trying to accomplish here is having a good network of bike routes that they can funnel themselves as they get closer to the core of town, and then have multiple options to get to City Beach. You know, there are some great multi-use paths in town already that can be utilized to get to some extent, but it's all about having a great network to get people to those areas where they feel more safe to make that last mile of travel to City Beach. And we're trying to make this as safe as possible and accommodate different types of users for those who don't feel comfortable riding in the road, such as the 10 or 8-year-old. And that's where we are looking to allow individuals to ride on sidewalks in some areas, and have separate paths in other areas.
Thank you. And I am getting to the rest of the question. It is long, so I'm trying to break it down into parts. And so the other question is really around routes. And I appreciate this question so much because I think it's important to know how we actually got to the map that's on the screen this evening. It all began with the past effort that was called Explore Sandpoint. So we took those layers that were in our GIS mapping system that were specifically the adopted routes that were adopted years ago. We had a great effort with the pedestrian and bicycle committee that spent a lot of time putting together these designated routes. Those are on our GIS system. And so this map took that information and then it added to it based upon the community feedback that we got and adjusted. So the intent with the multimodal transportation plan is to be a holistic, comprehensive plan for all users. And so, yes, our new maps the intent would be that they are a living document. So as further revisions need to happen as our town continues to grow and different businesses move in and different needs come about, that the map can be revised to add some new routes or shift them as we hear feedback from the community. So I don't think any of the efforts in the past have been lost. I think they've merely been added to. And with that said, I'm really excited to kind of update some of our pamphlets and get some of these other routes in place on that map and really solidify the plan. So I encourage everyone to take a super close look at this plan. We do have it printed on really large boards here at City Hall if you want to come in and be able to really hone in on certain areas and make comments and kind of redline areas that you think we may have missed or areas that you think wouldn't be a really good established route. So that component of it, I think, was a key question here. And that was specific to the Explore Sandpoint and if this proposal was scrapping an established plan, and the answer to that is no. And then the other portion of the question is really related to the cycle track that's along Oak. That cycle track is intended to continue to be built out as was originally planned, as best as we can. That said, back to Preston's point, what we're trying to show in this updated version is that there should be multiple safe routes. So what we heard from the community is if you live down by War Memorial Field and you want to go to City Beach, that riders, particularly kids who often want to take the path of least resistance and the shortest path, are not inclined to actually go all the way north to Oak and over. So trying to make other safe routes available for them so that there's multiple ways to get to City Beach that are safe for kids is kind of an exciting opportunity. So we look forward to developing that a bit more. And hopefully with that, I have adequately captured the question and addressed it. Is there anybody else that would like to, let's see here, we have a couple more. Oh, I do know another question. It was in regards to when would we be doing some of the connections there and improvements at Bridge and First. There was originally a concept that was floated by City Council at a City Council meeting for a very long-term plan. I say very long-term because it might be a couple years or it might be much longer. And so that concept provides where we would potentially close First Avenue at Bridge Street and create a plaza atmosphere. I don't know when that's going to happen. We have a lot of improvements that need to go into place before that improvement could be made. We need to make Pine Street a better arterial so that people have a path to go down instead of going north on First Avenue, which is currently the primary route there, and then the left onto Church. So I don't have an answer on the timing yet, but I do see that as a long-term solution that we'll continue to reassess and watch the data on. And then another question is just around in the summer, First and Bridge is really a huge problem for cyclists. Preston, I think you might be able to speak to that a little bit more. And then I can kind of talk to the idea of walk your wheels. So Preston, if you're there, could you maybe talk a little bit about some of the volumes and how we agree about the volume of pedestrians and bicycles at that intersection?
Sure. Yeah, everyone's aware of how congested that intersection can be, which is why we've been taking a hard look at it during those summer months. It is quite crazy with the amount of pedestrians crossing at those different crosswalks around that intersection, and conflicting with the vehicles that are also striving to get through that area or to the bridge, to Bridge Street and back, which is where those recommendations came from that you've seen in the past. By instituting or implementing some of those recommendations for the vehicles, it was all for really the purpose of creating a safer and more efficient area for the pedestrians and bikes. And by reducing those conflicts, we are really increasing the safety there, while also allowing vehicles to continue to move and be less frustrated when they're sitting there for long periods of time waiting for the hordes of pedestrians crossing. But the point of the core of town there is really for the non-motorist transportation users, so the walkers and the bikers. That's what we're trying to make safe, and they still have some priority down there to cross, and that's why we're trying to segregate as much as we can in some of those areas, and separate those users.
Thank you, Preston. As far as walk your wheels, this question is around how can we have symbols on the sidewalk that say walk your wheels and then yet say, hey kids, it's okay to be on the sidewalk along Bridge Street, for example. Great question. Two things. The intent as we move forward would be to develop a policy that's very specific about when and where and how we would allow bicycles on a sidewalk in the downtown core. It would not be a one-size-fits-all situation. And some of those key elements, as we've talked about in the past, really, number one, it needs to be wide enough. Number two, it can't be a sidewalk that has cafes on it or merchandise. Number three, arguably maybe number one, should be that it doesn't have doorways that are opening. So it's not where a business if you're inside of a business or a restaurant and you walk outside, that kids can be zooming by, or adults zooming by on their bicycles on the sidewalk. That we know isn't safe. What we're trying to allocate on Bridge Street is that, similar to the shared bicycle pedestrian portion that's on an actual bridge, this is just extending that pathway. And so the way we would try to make sure it was clear and not inconsistent is to really make, and we've seen this in other communities, to put up actual physical signage within the sidewalk, not only on the sidewalk, but as well having at the elevation that you would be on a bike as well, delineating the area. And there's also some pretty kind of, I'll call them artsy type of barriers that can kind of help traffic, guide traffic and delineate that this area is really unique and it's not something that you can do throughout downtown. So I look forward to us kind of working a little bit more on that policy and bringing it forward and getting a little bit more community engagement on that specific idea. And then I love this comment. And so I'm going to go ahead and read this because I think it's a great point, which is, can you make our #1 project, to be able to get kids safely to City Beach? And I completely understand that request. I will say that we, throughout this engagement effort, beginning with a survey where we had nearly 300 responses, everybody has their #1 project. And so once we've solidified, here are the solutions that have been developed, then we're really going to go through that prioritization process and rank the projects. What I anticipate is that we're going to end up with more than one #1 project, and we're going to have to strategize about how to fund them and what the timing of that funding looks like. And so I'm really excited to jump into that second round of prioritization, and that will be included in the draft multimodal plan that gets brought forward for public comment before it's adopted. So the public will get to weigh in on what's the #1 project and their #1 project. I think with that, do we have any other slides here?
I don't think so. I think that's really it for tonight.
Perfect.
There is a question about the width of the multi-use path on Division. Oh.
Good eyes. Yeah,
Yes.
so 12-foot wide. The question is, if you think 12-foot wide is needed on Division for multi-use path for pedestrians, how does a smaller, wider sidewalk work at First and Bridge? It doesn't. Our recommendation is that path width would be 12 feet. So we are having consistent recommendations there. Any other questions or thoughts from folks before we wrap up tonight? While everyone's thinking, I will just mention that we have one last workshop. It is part 3 of our 3-part series. That's going to be next Thursday at 6 p.m. It will be by Zoom in the same manner. And we will be discussing Highway 2, some improvements along there, as well as the Baldy Extension project that we've talked about a little bit when we're talking about Division. So I will give it one more second. Clerk, do you see anyone raising their hand that I may not see on my end?
Amanda, I do not.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for participating. I will remind you that this has been recorded and it will be available for viewing or sharing on our website. You can find the link on the front page under the news section. And we really hope to see you at our next workshop next Thursday. Thank you all and have a good evening.
Thank you.